Hey guys, I'm across the street from First United Methodist Church. I'll tell the story about this church, but really as a means of telling the story of Francis Asbury. He's one of the most significant figures in American and British evangelicalism. This church building here dates back to about 1955, give or take. Replaced an earlier church that was built there in 1909. But there's been a string of churches or religious societies here going back into the 1700s. Francis Asbury was born in the 1740s in a town of what's now Great Barr in England near Birmingham. Barr would be spelled like my last name, and it means hill. He was raised in a blue-collar family in a cottage next to a tavern. And I guess his mother went into a depression when he was younger after the birth or the death of one of his sisters. And he described her as a very worldly woman during this time. She was converted during maybe a revival or a circuit riding preacher, and it's unclear whether that preacher was Baptist or Methodist. But although Asbury's father wasn't quite as religious, he allowed his wife to have Methodist society meet in their cottage. Methodism at the time was still part of the Anglican Church and did not have its own churches, but it would have societies where circuit riding preachers or teachers would visit and hold services and instructional times of prayer and instruction and Bible classes. Francis Asbury became a metalsmith in his teenage years, but then at age 18, he was approached by someone and said, "Hey, do you want to be a circuit riding preacher?" And he said yes, and the next year he went to London to receive training. While in London, he met George Whitefield, who was a famous preacher, revival preacher in the United States, an early abolitionist. And in staying in Whitefield's house at that time was Benjamin Franklin. The next year, Wesley was handpicked for special treatment by John Wesley, one of the early founders of, the founder of Methodism. Wesley preached in England for a few years, and then in 1771 volunteered to go to what was then British North America. He arrived and was assigned to what is now called the Delmarva Peninsula. He was there when the war broke out in 1775 and was one of only two circuit riding preachers to remain in the United States during that time, and he went into hiding. After the war, the tie between Methodism and Anglicanism was kind of split, because Anglicanism, the Episcopal Church, was the official state church of England, was kind of ruled at the authority of the monarch, which the United States rejected. So John Wesley ordained two co-administrators of the church and Methodist Church in North America. And one was Thomas Coke, who was ordained as a bishop in England. And then Coke came to the United States and ordained Francis Asbury, who administered the United Methodist Church, or what became the Methodist Church in the United States for 32 years until his death in 1813. In I think it was about 73, a circuit was established at Pittsburgh for pretty much what they called the Ohio country. All of the upper Ohio Valley was in one circuit. And then in 1787, the Ohio circuit was split off of what was the Redstone circuit, as well as the Clarksburg circuit being split off. So there was one circuit remained in the Pittsburgh area, one for northern West Virginia and one for what became the state of Ohio. The Clarksburg circuit split again in 1790 into the Randolph circuit, which would be the upper Taggart Valley area. 1788, Francis Asbury came here, and he established this church. It had been the site of a Methodist society, much like it had met in his mother's house as a childhood. But this became the center of the circuit, and it became an official church. Today, Francis Asbury also ordained a lot of black preachers, whether they were freed slaves or whatever. He was very against slavery. One of his earliest converts was an illiterate black man who nevertheless had a very great memory and memorized large parts of the Bible after Asbury read them to him. He was the first black person in the United States to ever speak to a white audience at Asbury's invitation. Asbury died, and he's now memorialized by the Anglican Church in England, and he gets a feast day along with George Whitefield. But at the time of his death, his ordination as a bishop was not accepted because it was performed outside the bounds of the Anglican Church. Nevertheless, he can claim to be sort of within the apostolic tradition because the bishops of England at one time were under the authority of the Bishop of Rome, and then when they split, they still carried on the tradition of only recognizing ordained bishops who had been ordained by someone in the succession. That's a little bit of history for you. It's very cold out here. Have a blessed day, everyone. I'll holler at you later.